The air in the neighborhood was thick with anticipation. Karen stood on her manicured lawn, her eyes filled with a cold sense of superiority as she pointed toward my cabin. "Move it or else," she said, voice rising. But I wasn't moving. Not for anyone. Not now. Not ever. Before I start let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching this from. I read every single one, and I'd love to give you a personal thank you for being here. My name is Ethan Rowe. At 62, I thought I'd left the chaos behind when I inherited my uncle's lakeside cabin. A peaceful refuge, a place to escape the scandal that ruined my career. The cabin was small, weathered, but it was home. A legacy built from my uncle's sweat and dreams. Each morning, I sat on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the mist rise over Lake Arrowhead. The water still, the world serene. But beneath that calm surface, memories of a career destroyed by corruption. A whistleblower scandal in Denver lingered. In the city, I was betrayed by those I trusted, my integrity shattered like glass. But here, among the towering pines, I almost felt free. Almost. That morning I could already feel it. Something was about to shatter this fragile peace. 3 cars pulled into my gravel driveway, disrupting the tranquil air. A white Escalade led the charge, followed by a sleek black sedan and a pickup truck. I knew what this was. Trouble. Karen Holloway, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association, stepped out of the Escalade like she owned the world. Her sharp silver hair, her designer blazer, all screamed wealth and power. She didn't look like someone who would take no for an answer. Behind her, a lawyer, Mark Leland, stood cold and distant, exuding the kind of arrogance only someone who wielded a $100 suit could. I took a slow sip of my coffee, waiting. This wasn't a simple dispute. I could feel it in my bones. The lawyer unrolled a blueprint, his finger pointed directly at my cabin. "This structure," he said, "is 20 feet over the boundary. You need to move it or face the consequences." Karen's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You're trespassing on community property, and we're not just going to let this slide." I set down my coffee mug, meeting her gaze with quiet defiance. I wasn't going anywhere. I reached for the deed to my property, my hands steady despite the storm of tension in the air. The cabin had been built in the 70s, by my uncle's hands. This land was mine, bought and paid for. The lawyer pulled out papers, declaring the HOA's official claim. "Current surveys say otherwise. This land doesn't belong to you." Karen's eyes narrowed, her finger hovering over her phone's emergency dial. I could hear the subtle click of the button. She was going to call the police. Threats, intimidation. They were all she knew. But something in her face shifted when she saw my calm. The faintest flicker of doubt. The next day, the survey team arrived. They spread out across the property, measuring with careful precision. I watched from my porch as they worked. Karen hovered nearby, her eyes darting nervously. Her lawyer flipped through pages of legal jargon, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. Finally, the surveyor's voice cut through the tension. "This land, it's all yours. The original boundaries match exactly what you've shown us." Karen's face drained of color. Her perfect, controlled world cracked open. The survey marked the official property line, and every house in the neighborhood sat on land that rightfully belonged to me. Whispers spread like wildfire. The powerful HOA, the moneyed elite, had been living on stolen land. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a cabin. It was about everything they'd built on lies. The police came later that night, not to remove me, but to drive away Karen and her entourage. The tables had turned. I stood at my uncle's cabin, the stillness of the lake reflecting the quiet victory I hadn't expected. I could have walked away, let them win. But this cabin, this land, it wasn't just my uncle's legacy. It was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone steal it from me. I closed the door to my cabin, leaning against the wood. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on solid ground. The fight wasn't over, but it had shifted. There was power in truth in standing your ground. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for something much bigger. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with a strange energy. The HOA's defeat was a quiet victory for me, but it was far from over. Whispers rippled through the streets, and though many turned a blind eye, I could feel the weight of their judgment. I wasn't just the man who refused to move his cabin. I was the man who exposed their lies. People who once greeted me with smiles now avoided eye contact, the silence thick with their awkwardness. Some were ashamed, others afraid to speak up. Karen's influence over them had been broken, but the power dynamics had shifted, and in small towns, shifts like these don't go unnoticed. For the first time in years, I felt like the outsider again, but this time I didn't mind. My uncle's cabin felt like the only true refuge left. It was a few days after the survey revelation when I found the first sign of retaliation. A note, simple yet ominous, was slipped under my door. "This is just the beginning." No name, no signature, just words that echoed in my chest. The peaceful mornings, which had become my sanctuary, now felt tainted by an unease I couldn't shake. I sat on the porch, watching the lake shimmer in the early light, but it no longer brought me the calm it once had. Something darker was at play now. The calm before the storm had ended. The next day, a van parked in front of my cabin, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. They watched, waiting for something to happen. I wasn't scared, but I was aware. They wanted me to feel isolated, vulnerable. It wasn't going to work. By the end of the week, the legal notices arrived. A letter from the HOA's attorney claimed that I had violated zoning laws and demanded that I move my cabin or face a lawsuit. I laughed bitterly. It was a clear move to wear me down, to make me doubt my own position. But this wasn't the first time I'd faced a battle over something that wasn't mine to give up. The fight wasn't about a cabin anymore. It was about truth. And truth had a weight to it, a gravity that couldn't be ignored, no matter how many suits they sent or how much money they threw at their cause. I could almost hear the hum of the old wood beneath my feet, the legacy of my uncle reminding me that some things, once earned, are never taken away without a fight. Days passed and the pressure mounted. Karen's face appeared less frequently, but her presence loomed over every conversation. I'd catch snippets of whispers in town, people talking about the troublemaker. The term didn't sting like it once would have. I wasn't just a troublemaker. I was someone who had lived through much worse, someone who'd lost everything before and rebuilt. This cabin was my redemption, not just for me but for the integrity I had fought so hard to preserve. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, a shadow crossed my porch. Another visitor. This time it was a woman. Her face was familiar, but I couldn't place her. She stepped up slowly, glancing around, as if making sure no one saw her approach. "Mr. Rowe, we need to talk," she said, her voice low, tinged with something like fear. The woman introduced herself as Nancy Cole. She was one of the original homeowners from Silver Pines. I invited her inside, offering coffee, my hands shaking slightly. "I know what you're going through," Nancy said, sitting down at the table. "I've been questioning everything after this whole mess started. Karen isn't just worried about property lines. She's part of something much bigger." Her words hit me like a thunderclap. Karen wasn't just protecting her neighborhood. She was protecting a web of lies. Nancy handed me a stack of documents, all showing discrepancies in the land surveys over the years. She'd been researching quietly, afraid to speak out. But after seeing what Karen and the HOA had done to me, she couldn't stay silent anymore. "My house," Nancy said, her voice trembling, "might be sitting on land that isn't hers either." As Nancy and I pored over the documents, a chilling realization began to take root. The maps, once dismissed as irrelevant, now told a story of manipulation. The boundaries had been shifting quietly, imperceptibly over the years. They weren't simple mistakes. They were carefully crafted adjustments, each one inching closer to land that didn't belong to them. Nancy's eyes were wide with disbelief, but there was no denying what the papers showed. She had been living on land that once belonged to my uncle too. The HOA wasn't just targeting my cabin. They had been manipulating property lines all over Silver Pines. "This isn't just about me," I whispered. "This is about all of us." Nancy's face hardened. "We need to expose this before it's too late." It wasn't long before the first official warning arrived. A building inspector showed up unannounced at my cabin, his clipboard ready. He scanned the property with cold eyes, his steps methodical, like he'd done this 1,000 times. He muttered something about safety violations and the need to inspect for structural integrity under new regulations. But I knew better. This was no routine check. It was another tactic to push me off my land, to break my resolve. I didn't flinch. I stood tall, holding my ground as he pointed out imaginary flaws with my uncle's carefully built cabin. "Do you honestly think this is a safety hazard?" I asked, my voice steady. The inspector didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the van parked by the trees. Someone was watching. Someone was pulling strings. I spent the following days researching, preparing. The legal system wasn't going to work in my favor. I had seen that in Denver. Money and power could twist it into whatever shape they needed. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Nancy and I met at Pinecone Diner again, poring over maps and survey records. More residents were beginning to notice the discrepancies in their own properties. But most of them were still too afraid to act. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was tight, and anyone who challenged her risked losing everything. Couldn't back down. I was fighting for more than just my cabin. I was fighting for the truth, and for those who had no voice. "They can't silence all of us," I said, determination hardening my voice. "We'll expose them." It was late when I got the text. "Meet me at Pinecone tomorrow morning. I have information. Don't tell anyone." The anonymity of it chilled me. Was it a trap? Or was this the break we had been waiting for? When I arrived, the woman was already sitting at a corner booth, her face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. As she sat across from me, she leaned forward, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I'm Grace Danner," she whispered. "I work in the county office. I've been pulling records. Your land wasn't the only one stolen." Her words sent a ripple of shock through me. Grace had access to the documents I needed. She'd been quietly gathering evidence, too. "I'm ready to help," she said, slipping me a thick folder. "It's bigger than you think." That night, I went through the folder Grace had given me. The documents were damning. They showed that the land manipulation wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate campaign, orchestrated by Sterling and his associates. The subtle shifts in property lines over the years, the false surveys, and the residents who had been sold homes, unaware that they were sitting on land that didn't belong to them. Grace's information was the smoking gun. This was no longer just a fight for my family's cabin. This was about a conspiracy that reached deep into the fabric of the community and beyond. The next morning, I stood on my uncle's porch, the sun rising over the lake. I knew the battle had just begun, but this time I wasn't alone, and we weren't going to lose. The days felt like a slow burn. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. The quiet tension in the air, the whispers that were growing louder. People in the neighborhood began to question everything. Some stopped avoiding me, but there were still those who chose silence over truth. Every time someone nodded at me on the street, I could see the battle in their eyes. The fear of standing up, the hesitation of speaking out. I couldn't change everyone's mind, but I wasn't fighting for them. I was fighting for what was right. Nancy stopped by one afternoon. Her face was tired, but her eyes were burning with a quiet resolve. "We have to go public, Ethan," she said. "If we wait too long, they'll silence us all." I didn't expect it to happen like this. One morning, the doorbell rang, and there was a reporter standing on the other side. Mia Crawford, a journalist from a local news outlet, held a microphone, her camera crew behind her. "I've been following the story," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I know about the fraudulent surveys, and I want to help you expose it." Mia had been quietly investigating the HOA's ties to Sterling's development empire. She knew the stakes, and she was ready to risk everything to shine a light on the truth. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what we were about to do settling on me. But as I looked at her, something clicked. "Let's do it," I said, my voice firm. It was time to make noise. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The article Mia wrote went live, and within hours it spread like wildfire. Headlines appeared in newspapers, social media exploded with posts about the Silver Pine scandal. The truth was finally out. But with that truth came a wave of backlash. The HOA tried to discredit Mia, labeling her a biased journalist and pushing fake stories to discredit the claims. Karen and her allies started sending threats, both public and private, trying to intimidate anyone who would dare speak up. But the harder they pushed, the stronger the resistance became. Neighbors who had once been silent began calling, texting, showing up at my door with their own stories and documents. We weren't alone in this anymore, and neither was Karen. It wasn't long before the intimidation tactics escalated. One night, I found a broken window at the cabin. The rocks thrown through it were no accident. Someone was sending a message. The phone calls came next, anonymous, late at night. Heavy breathing, threats, promises of worse things to come if I didn't back down. The fear they wanted to instill was palpable. But it wasn't fear I felt. It was anger. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was standing up for everyone who had been silenced by fear. Everyone who had been manipulated. I looked at the broken window the next morning, the sunlight casting long shadows across the cabin. I wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. Things came to a head the following week. Grace contacted me late one evening, her voice trembling. "They're coming after me," she said. "They know I've been gathering evidence. They're threatening to ruin my life." I told her not to worry. This was bigger than any of us. The next day, we met with Mia and Nancy. The pressure was building, and we needed to act fast. "Everyone's watching now," Mia said, her eyes hard with determination. "They can't keep hiding the truth. We have to take them down before they destroy all of us." It was time to fight back. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. This was about standing up to a system that had grown too powerful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. The truth was going to win. The battle isn't always won by the strongest, but by those who refuse to back down. Truth, courage, and unity can overcome even the darkest forces. This journey reminds us that standing firm can change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more stories like this.